Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back in time, far back, into a world of cold stone walls, damp straw floors, and the steady toll of bells that ruled every breath you took. Imagine standing in a fog-drenched village where the sound of iron striking iron isn't a factory or a subway break. It's the church bell calling you to prayer, to work, to bed. You think your phone notifications run your life? You haven't seen anything yet. Back then, a bell told you when to eat, when to kneel, when to sleep, and sometimes, when to run. You probably wouldn't survive the first week, not because of dragons or disease, but because you'd miss a bell and break a rule you didn't even know existed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing those dots light up all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a muddy square at dawn, breath clouding in the chill air. Somewhere in the grey distance, a single bell starts to ring. Slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. That's your alarm clock, only it doesn't come from your nightstand. It comes from a squat stone tower that casts its shadow across every decision you'll make today. In the medieval world, time belongs to God, and the bell is his voice. Monks, farmers, bakers, even lords take their cues from its rhythm. 6 rings for prime, 9 for terce, noon for sext, 3 for none, and so on until the last echoes fade into compline, the bedtime prayer. It's not just about prayer, it's about control. When to eat, when to stop, when to repent. The bell orders society as cleanly as an Excel spreadsheet. Historians still argue whether the idea of clock time as a moral discipline, being on time, working to the minute, was born here, in these monasteries that rang their hours so obsessively. You like to think you're free, but that little calendar ping on your phone, that's the bell's descendant, still telling you what to do. You wander down the rutted lane, passing the blacksmith's forge. The smith nods toward the abbey tower. "Lords," he mutters, "that means it's time to begin the day's labor." The rhythm isn't just spiritual, it's practical. A bell tolls faster when fire spreads, slower when it's safe. A single drawn-out note could mean danger. You can almost imagine medieval villagers listening the way you scroll a group chat, trying to read tone, urgency, hidden meaning. By the 13th century, bells had personalities. Some rang bright and clear. Like angels, chroniclers said, others were sullen or jealous, voices of wrath. Every bell had a name, Mary, Michael, Thomas, and every tone a purpose. When you hear Big Ben or a school bell or even the ding of a train door today, you're hearing a faint echo of those saints of sound. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The first mechanical tower clocks appeared in Europe around the 13th century, built mainly for monasteries. They were not meant to tell everyone the hour, they were meant to summon obedience. The earliest was so inaccurate they could lose 20 minutes a day, but accuracy didn't matter. The bell was not for you to measure, it was for you to obey. And here's a fringe tidbit: some medieval towns believed bells could drive away storms or demons. They'd ring furiously during lightning strikes, sending sonic blows to scatter evil spirits. The superstition grew so strong that the Vatican eventually had to issue warnings about bell ringers electrocuting themselves in the middle of thunderstorms. You can imagine a poor monk shouting, "Begone, demon," right before the next strike hits. Moral of the story? Maybe some rules are meant to be broken, or at least grounded. You stroll toward the fields, ears still ringing with memory. A bell marks the Angelus, signaling me. D-Day prayer. Everyone pauses, tools drop, carts stop, even arguments freeze mid-sentence. You can feel the air itself change texture, heavier, holier. Then, a few minutes later, the rhythm resumes, as if the entire world just took one synchronized breath. You might wonder, why are we so attached to these invisible schedules? Maybe it's comfort. Maybe it's survival instinct. In a world with no clocks, no public education, no standard calendar, the bell is the one stable heartbeat of time. It's the hum of civilization. And even now, in your glass-walled office or home full of screens, that hum still lingers. The 9-to-5 workday traces its lineage directly to the monastic schedule of 8 canonical hours. When your alarm app tells you to hydrate, to breathe, to focus now, it's basically an abbot in your pocket. But don't laugh too hard. You'd probably be grateful for that bell if you lived here. The medieval night was long, dark, and full of fear. Candles cost money. Wolves howled outside town gates. The bell was your guardian angel. Its echo proof that you weren't alone. Some churches even rang the curfew bell, from the French couvre-feu or cover fire, to remind villagers to extinguish hearths and stay inside. Miss it, and you risked burning down your house or facing punishment for breaking curfew. Sound familiar? The phrase lights out comes from that same instinct to protect through control. The bell also marked death. When someone died, it tolled slowly, heavy as wet cloth. The pattern told listeners whether the deceased was male or female, child or elder, rich or poor. You didn't need a Facebook status to spread the news. The air itself carried it. Some towns even had a specific passing bell, rung 3 times a day for 3 days after a death, believed to help the soul find its way. Imagine living in a world where the dead had their own soundscape. Of course, bells could also signal joy, weddings, coronations, harvests, victories. Their clang could drown out fear, unify strangers and announce hope. A monk once wrote that bells speak to the heavens in iron tongues. You might roll your eyes, but listen closely. Cities still do this. We ring bells for New Year's, for weddings, even for school graduations. Every metallic ring is a ghost of those same medieval chimes. You stop by the church door, it's open, and the scent of beeswax and old stone breathes out at you. Inside, a bell rope hangs like a muscle, smooth from centuries of touch. You run your fingers along it and feel something strange, continuity. You and a peasant from 800 years ago both waiting for the same sound to tell you what's next. The funny part? Most of those bells weren't meant to be heard by everyone. Early towers were built for the monks, not the masses. But sound travels. The villagers overheard, learned the rhythm, and adapted their lives around it. That's how power spreads. Not through laws, but through habits. Today, nobody forces you to check your email every 15 minutes, yet somehow you do. Bells never die, they just change shape. Historians still argue whether the mechanical clock or the bell came first in shaping Europe's time discipline. Was it the technology that taught obedience, or obedience that demanded technology? Either way, both became inseparable from the idea of civilization itself. A person who ignored the bell wasn't just lazy, they were uncivilized. It's the same quiet judgment you feel when you're late to a meeting or forget a deadline. Somewhere deep in our wiring, the bell still rings. You walk back through the square as twilight gathers. The curfew bell begins its slow toll, one heavy beat every few seconds. Doors creak shut, chickens mutter in their coops, the air cools and thickens like velvet. The sound rolls over rooftops, bounces off stone and fades toward the woods. You realize that even silence afterward feels structured, like an absence built by rhythm. Modern towns still ring bells for rias. Ons that have nothing to do with faith, to mark the hour, to open markets, to honor the fallen. The pattern remains because we crave it. The sound is both command and comfort. It tells us we're part of something bigger, that there's still order in chaos. As you stretch your legs and prepare to wander further into the medieval maze, the bell's final note trembles through the air, one long resonant hum fading into the dark. You can almost hear your smartwatch buzz in sympathy, a tinny modern echo of that iron voice. And though you won't admit it out loud, part of you feels safer knowing someone, somewhere, is still keeping time for you. You wake to the smell of smoke and stew, thick, earthy, the kind that clings to your hair and your memories. The morning bell has long since rung, and the village is already alive with clatter. You wander toward the long wooden table outside the tavern where people are setting up for the midday meal. There's laughter, gossip, and one unmistakable thing: rules. Not written ones, but lived ones. Where you sit, how you hold your spoon, who eats first. Everything is dictated by invisible lines drawn centuries before you were born. A woman lays out bread that looks like a flat stone. A man sharpens his knife, but never points it at anyone. You think he's just being polite, but no, he's following a law older than tablecloths. In the Middle Ages, knives weren't communal cutlery, they were weapons. Everyone brought their own, and don't point it at the host wasn't etiquette, it was survival. If someone gestured too wildly while cutting cheese, you ducked. You slide onto a bench, and a serving boy sets down a bowl of broth so thin you could count your reflection in it. No forks yet. Those are still a scandal waiting to happen. You eat with your fingers, careful not to lick them too, obviously. You'd think these people would be grateful just to have food, but no. The medieval table is a theatre of restraint. You tear bread with your hands, but never from the middle. That's for the host. You sip from the cup with your right hand only. You don't blow on hot stew rude. You don't slurp unholy. And under no circumstance do you burp in satisfaction. That's reserved for the gluttons of the East, or so your neighbors whisper. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Forks entered Western Europe from Byzantium around the 11th century, but were considered shockingly effeminate. An Italian noblewoman named Maria Argyropulina was once mocked by a priest for using a golden fork. He claimed her vanity insulted God's creation. When she died young, the priest smugly declared her death divine punishment for her luxury of the table. Imagine going viral for your silverware choice and then being blamed for dying because of it. Now, a fringe tidbit, some monks believed that food should never be stabbed. They thought piercing bread or meat mimicked the wounds of Christ, so diners were urged to tear gently. That's right, your modern habit of cutting pancakes carefully instead of hacking at them? You're reenacting theology. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were genuine belief or clever class politics, a way to distinguish civilized diners from the crude peasantry. Either way, you're still living it every time you put your napkin on your lap and pretend you've read the wine list. You look around the table. There's a rhythm to it. The nobleman at the head eats first, everyone else waits. The servants hover like shadows, refilling cups and scraping trenchers, the thick slabs of bread that serve as plates. Afterward, those soggy trenchers are given to the poor or tossed to dogs. Waste not, want not. It's an early version of recycling, minus the hashtags. The conversation hums with its own rules. No politics unless you're high-born. No gossip about clergy unless you want trouble. You can compliment the cook, but not too much. It might sound flirtatious. And above all, don't talk while chewing. You think Emily post-Inven? Ted that? She's just the latest scribe in a 1,000-year-old code. What makes these habits so sticky, you wonder, that we still use them without knowing their origin? Maybe because meals are when humans reveal their animal side. Etiquette evolved as armor against embarrassment. When you eat, you're vulnerable. Hands busy, mouth open, defenses down. Rules make that safe. You glance at your neighbor, a young man gnawing a chicken bone so aggressively that splinters fly. Across from him, a lady sighs, dabs her mouth and mutters something about manners of beasts. You realize she's reciting a social truth: behavior defines class. In the medieval world, politeness isn't just taste, it's proof of breeding. And in a world obsessed with order, that's power. It's funny though, many of these civilized customs were born from raw practicality. The rule about not resting elbows on the table, it wasn't moral, it was structural. Tables were so flimsy they could collapse. Keep your elbows off or wear your stew. But once nobles started enforcing it, it became a virtue. The poor did it out of necessity. The rich called it refinement. Sound familiar? Like designer jeans with pre-made holes. You sip your ale and think of home. You still sit up straight in restaurants. You still wait your turn to talk. You still feel vaguely guilty for using your phone at dinner. That quiet choreography of civility, it's ancient muscle memory. You didn't learn it, you inherited it. Here's another scholarly debate for you to fall asleep to. Some historians argue that medieval manners didn't really civilize people, they just disguised aggression. A knight might bow at dinner, but he'd still gut you in a joust. A lady might curtsy, then ruin your reputation with a whisper. Politeness, they say, was camouflage, an elegant armor. So when your coworker smiles through clenched teeth at a meeting, remember, you're watching a court ritual older than chivalry itself. A serving girl clears the table, humming softly. She moves in practiced loops, a kind of dance. You notice how even servitude has its own etiquette. Never reach across a guest, never show the bottom of a dish, always approach from the left. Those habits echo into fine dining today. When a waiter sets your plate down clockwise or refills your glass from the right, they're performing a ritual shaped by the etiquette manuals of the 14th century. You reach for the salt. It sits in a small ornate bowl, the salt cellar, right in the middle of the table. But you hesitate. In this world, salt is sacred. To sit above the salt marks you as noble, below means you're common. You check your position, realize you're somewhere in between, and pretend not to care. Salt divides the table like a social fault line. You just wanted to season your stew, instead you've stumbled into a class war. The host raises his cup, and everyone follows. A toast, but not the clinking kind. No glass on glass here. That sound was once thought to invite spirits or demons. You simply nod, sip, and hope no one spills. Later, as twilight drips through the thatched roof, you notice that eating together feels less about hunger and more about order. Everyone plays their role. Even silence has its purpose. The church bell you heard earlier shaped the rhythm of the day. This table shapes the rhythm of society. One last joke before dessert, if you can call it that. A traveller at the far end tells a tale about a knight who tried to impress a lady by eating peas with a knife. The punchline? He stabbed his tongue and had to drink soup through a straw for a week. The table erupts in laughter, half at him, half in relief that someone else broke a rule first. You laugh too, quietly. You've learned enough to know the sound of ridicule can spread faster than the bell's echo. As the meal ends, hands are washed in rose-scented water, a luxury reserved for guests. You dip your fingers and feel the perfumed warmth. Someone dries them with linen. You wonder, how much of this is about cleanliness, and how much is about performance? Medieval people weren't obsessed with hygiene the way modern myths suggest. They just defined clean differently. For them, to wash was to purify, not sterilize. To dine properly was to prove your worth. You rise from the bench, belly full but mind buzzing. The rules of the table linger like candle smoke, arbitrary, elegant, and somehow comforting. When you walk into a restaurant tomorrow and instinctively fold your napkin just so, you'll hear the whisper of these wooden tables and their invisible hierarchies. A bell rings again somewhere beyond the tavern wall, its deep note rolling through the night like a reminder. You smile. Even mealtime obeys the bell. You realize that in the grand symphony of medieval life, every sound, every gesture, every bite is part of one long, unbroken pattern. And whether you're sipping ale in a smoky hall or scrolling through a food delivery app at midnight, you're still playing by rules written before anyone had the nerve to question them. You wander from the tavern into the cool evening, that golden medieval hour when hearth smoke curls like ribbons through narrow lanes and voices blur into a low, warm hum. Someone somewhere is tuning a lute, someone else is cursing at a stubborn donkey, and above it all rises the heartbeat of every noble's favorite obsession, etiquette. You think modern social media is performative? Wait till you see a 14th century court where even breathing too loudly could earn a raised eyebrow. A page rushes past, clutching a polished helmet nearly as big as his torso. "Mind your bow," he hisses. The Lord Steward is watching. You quickly lower your head, unsure how deep to go. There's a hierarchy even to humility here. Too shallow, and you're insolent. Too deep, and you're mocking. It's like trying to use emojis in a professional email. One wrong tone, and your reputation dissolves. Inside the manor hall, light pools across tapestries and polished wood. Nobles glide more than they walk. You notice how no one slouches, no one speaks first, and no one ever shows their souls. Posture is a kind of armor here. Stand straight, hands clasped, eyes soft. That slight turn of your wrist, the angle of your bow, they're not gestures, they're grammar. You might find it funny that this obsession with proper behavior came from something rather messy, the court of Burgundy, where knights tried to impress each other as much as their ladies. Over time, gestures of respect, kissing a hand, lowering the eyes, hardened into rules. Manuals of manners, like Erasmus's on civility in children, later spread those ideas far beyond noble halls. When your teacher told you to sit up straight and say please, you were following orders written half a millennium earlier by men who wore tights. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The word etiquette comes from French etiquette, meaning a label or ticket. At Versailles, guests were literally handed printed cards listing expected behaviors, where to stand, when to bow, what to wear. You didn't just have manners, you had instructions. Miss a cue, and you might as well vanish socially. But here's your fringe tidbit. Some scholars claim that the phrase blue blood originated when pale-skinned nobles showed visible veins beneath their skin, proof, supposedly, that they weren't sun-darkened labourers. It's a ridiculous flex, but it worked. Nobility literally branded itself through lack of melanin. So when someone today talks about high society, they're echoing medieval pseudo-biology with a straight face. You glance around the hall again. Every garment, every gesture is a badge. The lady near the fire wears a gown so tight it might be structural. The men's tunics gleam with embroidery that probably took 10 months of someone else's eyesight to complete. You think of the modern workplace, dress code, business casual, professional attire. We laugh about it, but deep down we're still following the same idea. Clothes are moral indicators. And then there's speech. The noble next to you speaks in layers of flattery so delicate you could spread them on bread. Compliments are currency, directness is vulgar. He says, "You shine brighter than the king's lanterns," which really means, "Don't embarrass me." Language itself is etiquette, and you start realizing how little has changed. That co-worker who starts every email with, "Just circling back," same energy. Historians still argue whether this rise of etiquette truly made society more civilized or just more anxious. Did people become kinder, or just better at hiding cruelty behind smiles? A few modern scholars suggest that politeness didn't suppress violence, it just moved it indoors, into the quiet violence of reputation. You didn't duel your enemy anymore, you whispered them into exile. A herald clears his throat. The room stiffens. A lady in blue enters, and everyone lowers their gaze. She is the Duchess, which means her movements define everyone else's. She doesn't walk so much as float, head high, neck long, arms like swan's wings. You copy her posture, feeling foolish but strangely powerful. There's something intoxicating about structure. You don't have to guess how to behave. The rules already know for you. At dinner, the Duchess corrects a knight for crossing his legs. You blink, what's wrong with that? But in medieval courts, crossing legs was a gesture of arrogance, implying equality with your host. You uncross yours immediately, even though no one's looking. There's a warmth in obedience, you realize, like slipping into a familiar rhythm. Now a joke from the jester breaks the tension. Something about a friar who mistook a goat for a choir boy. The laughter is polite, measured. No one wants to be the first to stop or the last to laugh. Even humor here is choreographed. You sip your wine and feel the weight of centuries of invisible performance pressing down on your shoulders. The night stretches on. Dancing begins, pairs gliding in perfect geometry. Every step is prescribed. Bow, turn, touch, retreat. You think of modern dating rituals, the scripts we still follow, who texts first, how long to wait before replying. It's all courtly dance, just updated to Wi-Fi. A servant whispers something near your ear. It's about etiquette books again. The Book of the Courtier by Castiglione, written in 1528 but echoing this very moment. It taught that true grace meant hiding effort, to act as if virtue were natural, not learned. That idea still rules social life today. Smile without looking like you're trying. Dress up but say you just threw it on. Work hard but pretend you don't care. The medieval court invented your Instagram persona centuries early. You notice how even religion feeds into this. Piety has posture, hands folded, head bowed, eyes lowered. Medieval sermons often scolded believers not just for sinning, but for standing incorrectly while repenting. The body became a billboard of virtue. The Duchess's stillness isn't just grace, it's salvation by choreography. Outside, the wind hums against stained glass. You step into the courtyard for air, the stars sharp as frost. The air smells of hay, perfume, and pride. You think about how exhausting it must be to live this way, to measure every blink, every breath. Yet we still do. You hold doors open. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You curate politeness like a garden. Civilization depends on pretending we're better than our impulses. A stable boy runs past, nearly tripping. You help him up, instinctively saying, "You're fine." He looks shocked that a guest spoke to him at all. Then he bows so low his forehead nearly touches the dirt. In that moment, you see the full machinery of etiquette. It protects the powerful by keeping everyone else perfectly still. Still, it isn't all bad. Without these little rituals, society might unravel. Rules can be oppressive, yes, but they can also be gent. They tell us how to move together without crashing. You watch the dancers again through the hall's open door. They're still circling, spinning, smiling in rhythm. It's beautiful, really, like stars locked in orbit, fragile but eternal. As you turn to leave, a final bell rings, faint, distant, familiar. Not a church bell this time, but the bell for curfew, signaling that the evening's performances are ending. The crowd bows one last time, each person perfectly aware of who bows deeper and who dares to rise first, and as the last notes fade, you can't help thinking, maybe civilization itself is just a long rehearsal for approval. We dress it up as tradition, but underneath, we're all just hoping we've played our part correctly. You walk out into the night, posture perfect, head high. Somewhere, a voice whispers through the dark, soft, teasing, ancient, mind your manners. The manor fades behind you as dawn seeps through the mist, pale gold filtering across thatched rooftops and muddy lanes. Somewhere, the sound of a hammer on iron begins its steady rhythm again. Clang, pause, hiss. You follow it, half curious, half entranced, until you find yourself before the blacksmith's workshop. It smells of smoke, sweat, and molten earth. But what you don't expect to find here is bureaucracy. Inside, men in leather aprons bend over anvils, each wearing a small badge sewn onto their sleeves. It's not decoration, it's identification. You've stumbled into a guild, the medieval ancestor of your job title, your HR department, and your professional certification, all rolled into one. A burly man with soot-streaked arms looks up from his work. You a master, a journeyman, or an apprentice? He grunts. You hesitate because in this world that's not just a question, it's your social ranking. It determines your pay, your freedom, and even whom you can marry. The guilds didn't just protect trades, They created hierarchies that shaped society for centuries. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval guilds were formal associations of artisans or merchants that regulated production, prices, and training. The word apprentice came from the French apprendre, to learn. A boy might begin his apprenticeship at age 12 and remain bound to his master for up to 7 years, living in the master's home, eating his bread, and following his rules. Only after producing a masterpiece, a flawless example of his craft, could he earn independence. You glance around. The apprentices move with precision, mimicking every gesture of their masters. It's oddly familiar, like an internship where coffee runs have been replaced with bellows pumping. The journeymen, meanwhile, travel from town to town perfecting their trade, which is how the term journey became linked to career progression. You can't help smiling. We still talk about career paths, earning our stripes and moving up the ladder. We just replaced anvils with laptops, but here's your fringe tidbit. Some guilds had secret rituals, almost religious in tone. The Masons, for instance, were rumored to keep mystical knowledge about geometry and architecture, passed only through whispered oaths and symbolic handshakes. Later, those customs would evolve into the Freemasons, whose mysteries still fuel conspiracy theories today. Historians still argue whether those rituals truly held esoteric meaning or were simply creative ways to preserve professional exclusivity. After all, nothing keeps outsiders away like a little mystery. A whistle blows, sharp and bright. It's break time, but no one sits idle. The master walks the workshop, inspecting every piece. He's not just checking quality, he's enforcing discipline. A crooked horseshoe isn't a minor mistake, it's a threat to the guild's reputation. One craftsman's failure shames them all. You can practically hear the echoes of modern corporate culture. Performance reviews, brand loyalty, mission statements. And then it hits you. This is where your job titles were born. Master, apprentice, journeyman, assistant, foreman, all from this world. Even the phrase getting fired might come from apprentices literally being dismissed from the master's hearth, turned away from the fire where they once worked and ate. The guild hall looms nearby, a timbered building that smells of wax and ale. Inside, members gather for meetings beneath banners embroidered with symbols of their craft: a hammer, a loom, a fish, a ship. They vote on rules, settle disputes, and decide who's in or out. It's union politics, centuries early. You can almost hear someone grumbling about dues. One elder stands, clears his throat, and reads aloud the guild's charter. The language is flowery, but the intent is sharp: unity, exclusivity, protection. They fix prices, forbid unlicensed workers, and impose fines for breaking rank. No man shall sell unapproved goods, he recites, lest he dishonor the company and his brethren. You imagine medieval Yelp reviews carved into wood. The system has its charm, security, community, but also its shadows. Innovation suffers when rules tighten too much. A young tanner suggests a new method for treating hides faster. The room stiffens. The master coughs politely, meaning drop it. Creativity here is tolerated only when it doesn't threaten the structure. Ildcrest has been scraped away. His crime? Selling cloth below the set price. You wonder how many dreams were smothered for the sake of order. And yet, you can't quite condemn it. Humans crave structure the way iron craves fire. Even now, your resume lists your skills, your experience, your certification, all echoes of these guild marks. When you chase promotions, when you measure worth in titles, when you say I'm qualified, you're speaking the guild's language. As night falls, a final bell rings, not for prayer this time, but for closing the market. Stalls are shuttered, tools cleaned, hands wiped on aprons. The apprentices file home, still arguing over who struck the cleanest blow today. Their laughter fades into the dark, and for a moment, you swear you can hear keyboards tapping in their place. The rhythm of labor, the pride of craft, the weight of hierarchy, it all began here. You take a deep breath, the air thick with soot and continuity. Somewhere, a forge still glows, a hammer still sings, and the invisible ladder of mastery stretches ever upward, waiting for you to climb. You leave the guild hall as dawn paints the cobblestones silver, your boots tapping softly in the thin light. The air smells of dew and horse dung, a perfume of travel. Ahead, a long rutted road stretches between hedgerows, marked by wooden posts and the occasional milestone carved with a crown. You don't know it yet, but you're walking on one of the great arteries of the kingdom, the King's Road, the medieval ancestor of every modern highway, traffic rule and speed limit you've ever cursed under your breath. You take your first few steps, and a carter waves you to the side. "Stay left," he shouts, steering his oxen past with a grin. It's instinct for him, but it's history for you. In much of medieval Europe, travelers kept left on the road so their sword hands were free to defend themselves. The rule wasn't written, it was lived. You realize how old the impulse for road order really is, how much our desire to move safely through chaos defines civilization itself. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 12th century, royal decrees declared certain routes as the king's highways, protected under the crown's peace. Damaging them, blocking them, or ambushing travelers on them wasn't just theft, it was treason. These roads were public lifelines. Kings needed them for armies and messengers, merchants for trade, pilgrims for faith. The idea that a road could belong to everyone was radical, and it still forms the legal backbone of public infrastructure today. A coach rattles by, wooden wheels grinding against stone. You jump aside, realizing that even back then, speed was an issue. Nobles in fancy carriages were notorious for barreling through villages, scattering chickens and pedestrians alike. One chronicler in 1382 complained about reckless drivers of carts and coaches who endanger the limbs of honest folk. Congratulations, medieval people invented road rage long before horns existed. You continue walking, passing a crossroads where a man in a leather jerkin directs traffic with a handbell. He's the town beadle, responsible for enforcing local ordinances, basically a one-man DMV. He stops a merchant wagon to check its cargo and collects a small toll for using the bridge. You recognize the ritual immediately, taxation disguised as maintenance. "For the king's repair fund," he says, but his smirk says otherwise. Then there's the bridge itself, a narrow stone span arched over a muddy river. A carved plaque warns, "No horse shall gallop upon this bridge, nor wheel pass upon Sabbath." You read it twice and laugh. It's the ancestor of modern traffic signs, complete with moral overtones, safety mixed with sanctity. We may have traded Sabbath for no parking, but the spirit's the same. Someone, somewhere, believes rules keep us virtuous as well as safe. Here's a fringe tidbit. In some medieval towns, they posted speed regulations enforced not by police, but by sound. Bells were rung as carts entered and exited city gates. If a driver arrived too soon between rings, it meant they'd gone too fast. Dern life. Night descends slowly, stars trembling above the horizon. You pass a small shrine beside the road, a simple stone cross, candles flickering at its base. A sign reads, "Pray for safe passage." You kneel for a moment, not out of faith but out of habit. It feels right somehow to honor the countless feet that have walked this same path before you. You think of how we still do this, how every road trip begins with a little ritual, a coffee stop, a playlist, a whispered, "Drive safe." The medieval traveler had no playlist, just prayers and patience. But the hope was the same, that the journey, however long or uncertain, would end without loss. Somewhere behind you, a bell rings again, faint and far away. Maybe a church marking curfew, maybe an inn closing for the night. Either way, its rhythm wraps around the world like a steady heartbeat, echoing the same order that once governed every hoofbeat and footstep. You take one last look at the winding road ahead, its curves vanishing into moonlight. The King's Road has no end, not really. It stretches forward, generation after generation, rule after rule, until eventually it becomes a modern highway lined with reflective signs and blinking lights. Different vehicles, same obedience. You start walking again, slower now, savoring the sound of your boots on the packed dirt. The rhythm feels eternal. Left, right, the oldest rule of movement still guiding your every step. Morning breaks over the city, sunlight dripping like honey through the pointed arches of a church window. Bells toll in a dozen different keys, their overlapping echoes calling bakers, merchants, and sleepy apprentices out of their beds. You've followed the road right into the heart of a medieval town, where stone towers guard narrow lanes, and every wall feels like it's listening. But what really defines this world isn't the stone, it's the noise of law. The medieval city is a place of rules, proclamations, and punishments so elaborate they make your neighborhood hoe look gentle. A crier stands at the crossroads unrolling a parchment. By decree of his majesty, he booms, no man shall dump refuse before the hour of 9, nor slaughter beasts in the open market. You can practically hear the eye rolls. Rules like this came daily, scrawled on parchment and nailed to doors. They were part sanitation, part control, and part theatre. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval towns were among the first places in Europe to establish codified civic laws, known as borough charters or liberties. These documents granted citizens rights to trade, to govern themselves, and to be judged by local courts, rather than the whims of a passing noble. The Magna Carta gets all the fame, but city charters were the everyday miracle of legality. They made civilization possible. Still, as you wander through the streets, it's clear that order was a fragile illusion. A woman tosses water from a window, nearly soaking your cloak. "Sorry, my lord," she calls, though her grin says she's not sorry at all. Above her, a wooden sign reads "No waste to be thrown after vespers," hand-painted but ignored. You realize that the medieval city was a place where rules existed mostly so they could be broken. Down an alley, you hear the clink of chains. Two watchmen escort a thief, young, wiry, eyes defiant, toward the stocks in the market square. Punishment here isn't hidden behind walls, it's performed like theatre. The crowd murmurs approval, some throwing crumbs of bread, others insults. A baker's boy snickers. He stole a loaf, now he gets the taste of none. Public shame was the preferred enforcement method. Stocks, pillories and cages hung outside gates not just to punish, but to remind everyone that the city's peace came at a price. You can almost hear the medieval logic: better one man humiliated than 10 tempted. Modern justice hides behind bureaucracy, but the roots are here, in the need for rules to be visible, and yet, there. A strange egalitarianism to it. Everyone, from the drunkard to the merchant, faces the same wooden stocks. Even nobles could be fined for breaking sumptuary laws, those absurd dress codes that dictated who could wear what. A cloth merchant's wife fined for wearing velvet? That happened. Silk restricted to the nobility? Absolutely. You think of modern dress codes again, no jeans in the office, and feel the centuries blur. Here's your quirky tidbit: in 14th century London, pigs wandering loose were treated as legal offenders. City statutes declared that any swine found rooting in the king's highway could be seized, sold, or, if particularly troublesome, executed. Yes, executed. There are actual records of pigs being tried and punished, complete with witnesses. You can't help but picture a medieval courtroom where someone solemnly reads charges against a hog. Historians still argue whether these absurd laws reflected real belief or just bureaucratic theatre. Did people truly think animals could be guilty? Or were these trials simply moral lessons dressed as justice? Some scholars suggest they were symbolic, ways of showing that law applied to everything, even chaos itself. That illusion of control mattered more than truth. You turn a corner and find yourself in front of the town hall, a proud, square building with arched windows and a carved motto over the door: Pax et Lex, peace and law. Inside, the smell of ink and beeswax fills the air. Clerks scratch quills across parchment, recording fines and decrees in looping Latin script. You watch as a merchant argues over a broken contract. The mayor, robed in fur and self-importance, settles it with a nod. Pay half, shake hands, and remember you live under grace. It hits you. This is bureaucracy being born. Forms, ledgers, seals, these are the medieval ancestors of modern paperwork. The reason you still have to sign things in triplicate? Blame the 13th century clerk who invented the duplicate scroll. One copy for the town, one for the crown, and one for the poor soul who paid the fine. You step outside again and find a crowd gathering in front of a scaffold. Not for an execution, thankfully, but for a public proclamation. The crier unfurls another parchment, this one gilded at the edges. By order of His Majesty, he declares, henceforth every tavern shall close its doors by curfew bell, and no gambling is to take place upon the Lord's Day. The groan from the crowd is universal. You chuckle softly. The curfew itself, that nightly bell marking the end of the day, is one of the oldest rules still echoed in modern life. Couvre-feu, cover fire. Originally, it meant extinguishing hearth flames to prevent nighttime blazes. Over centuries, it became shorthand for staying inside after dark. Today, it's still used in emergencies and city ordinances, proof that medieval fears have simply evolved into modern caution. A sudden shout breaks the rhythm. A man is arguing with a guard about the weight of his bread loaf. The guard slams a metal disc onto the counter. It's the official standard weight, stamped with the city's seal. Bread too light? The baker gets fined or worse. Fair trade, the guard says. Honest measure. You realize that every modern consumer protection law has a medieval ghost. You take a turn down to the docks where the air thickens with fish and smoke. Sailors unload barrels stamped with customs seals, proof that taxes have been paid. A scribe checks each symbol, his fingers black with wax. This too is a kind of law. Economic, invisible, necessary. Without it, trade collapses. As you walk, you pass graffiti scratched into a wall. Long live the guilds, death to taxes. You grin. Some complaints never change. Beneath it, another hand has added, pay your dues and shut your mouth. Even rebellion has etiquette. Near the gate, the stocks are empty now, gleaming in the afternoon sun. A child runs past, pretending to lock invisible wrists inside. You remember that thief from earlier. His smirk, his silence. Maybe he'll change, maybe he won't. The city doesn't care. The law's purpose is rhythm, not mercy. It gives people a beat to live by even when it bruises. But there's a quieter rule that everyone seems to follow without needing parchment or decree. At sundown the market slows, and people nod politely to each other on the way home. It's an unspoken pact: survive the day, respect the peace. No one wrote it, but it binds tighter than any charter. You realize that most of the rules we follow, then and now, aren't about control. They're about coordination, about not crashing into each other in the dark. As the last bell of evening sounds, you sit on the edge of a fountain, watching torches flicker to life. Somewhere, a guard closes the city gate with a heavy thud. The noise echoes like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. And in that moment, surrounded by walls and rules and whispered prayers, you see the strange comfort in regulation. Chaos always finds a way in, but law, for all its flaws, keeps the candles lit. You close your eyes and listen to the hum of the city at rest. The bells fade, replaced by the soft rhythm of footsteps on cobblestone and a lullaby of murmured curfews. For all our progress, for all our cleverness, we're still those same creatures, needing boundaries to feel safe enough to dream. The morning comes with frost on the eaves and a soft hush across the fields beyond the city wall. You step outside the gate and watch farmers already bent over their work, sleeves rolled, breath steaming. The clang of the church bell echoes faintly, matins again, calling souls to begin the day. And as you walk toward the open countryside, you start noticing the strangest thing of all: how much of life here runs on ritual. Not law this time, not etiquette or charter, but habit, ancient and unquestioned. The kind of rules nobody remembers inventing. You pass a man scattering salt over a threshold, whispering a quick charm. He looks up, embarrassed, as if caught mid-prayer. Keeps mischief out, he mutters the old way. A woman nearby hangs a sprig of rowan over her barn door. For luck, she says. They don't call it superstition, it's just what's done. And suddenly you realize how many of your habits aren't so different. Knock on wood, don't open umbrellas indoors, avoid walking under ladders. Every one of them, you'll find, has roots buried deep in medieval soil. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, daily life was woven through with a mixture of Christian practice and older folk customs, many carried over from pre-Christian belief systems. The church, ever practical, often rebranded old pagan habits rather than forbidding them outright. Blessing fields before planting, once a fertility rite. Ringing church bells during storms, a baptized thunder charm. Civilization survives by renaming its magic. You stop by a field where farmers are blessing their tools with holy water before planting. The priest chants a short Latin phrase, and the men bow their heads. The rhythm is hypnotic: splash, murmur, bow. Yet when you look closely, one of the older farmers quietly slips a tiny bone charm into the soil before the priest turns around, just in case. The old gods never die, they just change uniforms. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval people believed that saying, "Bless you," after a sneeze could literally save your soul. Sneezing was thought to momentarily open the body to demonic invasion. So that polite reflex you perform today? It started as an emergency exorcism. Every bless you is a mini-spell you don't even believe in anymore. As you walk farther, the village opens up before you. Timber houses, a small church, a stone cross at the center. Children chase chickens, dogs bark at shadows, and someone is sweeping their doorway in careful strokes. Always sweep east to west, the woman explains when she catches you watching. Pushes the bad luck out toward the sunset. Yo. Nod solemnly, pretending you knew that already. Historians still argue whether medieval superstition was a symptom of fear or simply a form of community memory. Was it ignorance, or was it a survival mechanism? Tiny rituals that gave people control over chaos. One camp claims these customs reflected a world terrified of the unknown. The other says they were pragmatic psychology, small anchors in a sea of uncertainty. Either way, they stuck. A bell rings again, the church, of course, and villagers cross themselves automatically. Bells were more than timekeepers, they were weapons. They chase away storms, a farmer tells you, and scare off the devil. You smile, remembering modern storm sirens. Different frequencies, same purpose, we make noise to feel safe. You stop near a well where two women are arguing about washing clothes on a Friday. Bad luck, one insists. You'll anger the fair folk. The other shrugs. If they care about my laundry, they can help. You laugh quietly, but inside you know this tension too. The push and pull between tradition and reason, between that's silly and what if it's true. Nearby, a blacksmith hammers rhythmically at his forge. He pauses between strikes, tracing a quick sign of the cross on the anvil. Iron protects, he says simply. That belief runs deep, iron as guardian metal, able to ward off witches, fae or sickness. Even today, horseshoes hang above doors for luck. Leftovers of that same conviction. You've seen them without thinking twice. A superstition so old it's invisible. A traveller joins you on the road, her cloak patched, her smile wide. She carries herbs strung in bundles, smelling of sage and rosemary. For healing and for keeping peace, she explains. She's what villagers call a cunning woman. Half healer, half wise woman, always tolerated but never fully trusted. People come to her when prayers fail. She sells you a tiny pouch filled with salt and lavender. Hang it near your bed, she whispers. No nightmares. You slip it into your pocket, half amused, half grateful. The road leads past a small bridge and there you see it, a carved wooden face leering from the support beam. Its features are exaggerated, monstrous, almost comic. Troll ward, the traveller says. They used to say spirits hated being mocked. You can't help but think of modern gargoyles, of Halloween masks, of emojis even. The impulse is the same, use humour to keep fear at bay. The traveller leaves you near a grove of oak trees, waving farewell with a grin. Alone now, you notice ribbons tied to the branches, red, blue and gold, fluttering like prayers. Each one marks a wish. You touch a ribbon and feel the soft whisper of centuries of hope. People still do this, you think. Tie notes to trees, lock padlocks to bridges, make wishes at fountains. We call it romance, not ritual, but it's all the same need. To leave a fragment of yourself somewhere sacred. As the afternoon deepens, you find a cottage on a hill. The smell of herbs drifts from the chimney, and an old woman sits outside, stirring something in a pot. For the pox, she says before you even ask. Honey, sage and faith. You notice a cat sleeping nearby and a cluster of bones hanging by the door. Old ways still work, she adds with a wink. You believe her. You think of modern habits again, touching lucky charms before exams, carrying a rabbit's foot, or whispering a prayer before takeoff. We laugh at superstition, but we keep it close. It's comfort disguised as coincidence. The sky begins to turn gold. A group of children pass by, each holding a small candle. All Hallows, one says shyly. We walk to keep the ghosts away. You realize that even your Halloween traditions, the costumes, the candles, the treats, are born from these very rituals, meant to trick or feed restless spirits. The medieval world still flickers through every pumpkin you carve. As darkness folds over the landscape, you stop near a shrine by the road. A single candle burns the way. Air, protected by a glass jar. Someone's offering of bread rests beside it. You light a twig and hold it briefly in the flame, feeling its warmth chase away the chill. It's then that the thought hits you. Maybe superstition isn't backward at all. Maybe it's memory, an unbroken line of whispered rules that help generations survive long enough to question them. The modern world still runs on these invisible codes, just renamed manifesting, positive thinking, gut feeling. You smile in the half-dark, realizing we've only traded Latin prayers for hashtags. A soft breeze stirs the branches and one of the ribbons flutters loose, spiraling to the ground at your feet. You pick it up, tie it gently back to the tree, and whisper something small. Nothing grand, just a thank you for making it this far. Somewhere behind you, the church bell rings again, steady and sure, its sound crossing centuries of habit and hope. You start walking, your lavender pouch swinging softly at your side, feeling lighter than you expected. Maybe the old ways still work after all. You follow the winding lane down from the oak grove into softer land, where a faint mist hangs low over the fields, and the sun looks like a coin rubbed smooth. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows for the third time, and that's your signal. It's work hour, not clock in at 9 work, but dawn to dusk survival, guided by rhythms older than the calendar. You're about to see where another set of medieval rules still hides in plain sight. The rules of labour, of what counts as honest work, and who gets to rest. The road leads to a cluster of thatched cottages, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Men and women are already in motion. hoisting tools, kneeling by soil, herding animals into pasture. It's a choreography you recognize even now, just with different costumes. The sense that work equals virtue, that's medieval. The shame of idleness? Straight from the pulpit, a farmer straightens up, nodding in greeting. "Best start before the bell," he says, pointing toward the church spire. "Work begun before matins brings blessing." He means it too. Labor is not just necessity, it's morality. In a world where survival depends on the weather's mood, you measure righteousness by productivity. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the High Middle Ages, the Church had sanctified the very idea of labor. Monks in Benedictine orders followed the rule ora et labora, pray and work. It wasn't just about farming, it was a philosophy. To work was to worship, to shape chaos into order. Over time, that logic bled into secular life, blending theology with economics until diligence itself became divine. You can still hear its echo in every motivational poster that tells you hard work pays off. You join a group of laborers mending a stone wall. The rhythm of their work is steady: lift, place, wipe, breathe. A foreman calls out the pace, counting softly. There's no boss in a suit, but hierarchy is everywhere. Who digs, who supervises, who carries the ale jug. One of them grins and says, "Better than the whip, eh?" And you realize he's only half joking. Feudalism may have faded, but the ghost of it lingers in every manager's spreadsheet. A bell rings in the distance, the monasteries. The rhythm of the entire countryside bends to those bells. Time here isn't kept by clocks but by sound. Prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, each marking a shift in the day. You think about modern office life, the way meetings and deadlines carve hours into obedience. We replaced bells with notifications, but the leash feels the same. Here's your quirky tidbit: medieval peasants actually had more holidays than many modern workers. Between holy days, feasts and local fairs, some villages saw nearly 1/3 of the year as rest days. But before you envy them too much, remember that rest often meant fasting, attending church for hours, or mending communal fences. Not exactly beach vacations. Historians still argue whether peasants were overworked or underworked compared to industrial laborers. Some point to records showing long breaks for meals, naps in the shade, and winter downtime. Others note the relentless physical strain. No weekends, no overtime pay, no sick leave unless you died. The truth, like most history, is probably muddy. People worked until they couldn't, then prayed they'd earned enough goodwill to rest in peace. A ploughman passes, guiding 2 oxen with slow patience. The wooden plough squeaks in protest, carving furrows into dark soil. He hums a low tune, a work song older than written language. You catch a line about Saint Isidore blessing the harvest and realize how songs once served as calendars, prayers, and to-do lists rolled into melody. Even now we build playlists to keep ourselves moving. The beat keeps the body honest. At midday, everyone stops. Not for lunch, there's no word for lunch yet, but for dinner, the day's main meal: bread, cheese, maybe a bit of salted pork if it's a good week. You sit on a stone, chewing slowly, and a woman beside you chuckles. "You eat like a clerk," she says. "We shovel, not nibble." You grin and pick up the pace. Overhead, the church bell tolls again, time to resume. You realize the bells divide more than hours, they divide people. The peasant hears them as summons, the Lord hears them as background music. One chime, 2 realities. It's the same today. The sound of the clock means stress to one person, profit to another. By late afternoon, the light shifts gold. You notice how everyone keeps working even as fatigue sets in. They talk about the Lord's eye upon the idle, quoting Proverbs without irony. Sloth, after all, is one of the 7 deadly sins. It's amazing, you think, how deeply that guilt still runs. You close your laptop late at night, whispering, "I really should have done more," and somewhere, a medieval monk nods in approval. As the sun sinks, work ends. Not when people want to stop, but when the light dies. The day's rule is carved by nature. No candles for chores, someone reminds a young apprentice. Wasting wax is sin. That thrift has echoed for centuries, shaping everything from factory shifts to business hours. Artificial light might have freed us from sunset, but our minds still clock out by habit. Evening settles, and you wander to the edge of the village, where a few men gather around a small fire. They share ale and gossip, laughing about a miller who claimed the river spirits stole his grain. He blames ghosts for everything, one says, shaking his head. Next, he'll say they work harder than he does. The laughter is easy, honest, the kind that softens calloused hands. You watch them, realizing that leisure too follows its own code. You're allowed to rest only after proving you've earned it. That rule, work first, pleasure later, isn't modern morality. It's medieval bookkeeping of the soul. As night falls, a hush spreads. The final bell rings. Compline. The sound ripples over the fields, calling monks to prayer, farmers to sleep, and you to reflection. The stars above seem almost arranged by schedule, each one taking its turn to shine. You think of modern life again. Time cards, productivity apps, hustle culture. All those invisible expectations that whisper, "Don't waste time." We've just digitized the same sermon once shouted from pulpits. Work has always been our shared religion. But here's the twist. In the medieval world, work was also a community act. When someone's field failed, neighbors helped replant. When a barn burned, the village rebuilt it. Labor wasn't isolation, it was choreography. Maybe that's the rule we've forgotten. As you walk back toward the darkened cottages, the smell of smoke and bread fills the air. A dog barks once, then curls beside a doorway. The night feels gentle, earned. You realize how deeply satisfying it must have been to end a day knowing exactly what mattered. The field tilled, the wall repaired, the light fading. At just the right time, the bell tolls one last note, long and low. You whisper a small joke to yourself, another day, another denier, and smile in the quiet. For all our progress, the rhythm of work still holds us by the wrist, patient as gravity. You wake to a different kind of sound, not bells this time, but clanging, sharp, metallic, echoing through the crisp morning air like an argument between hammers. You follow it down a narrow lane toward a small forge, the heart of a medieval town's industry. Sparks fly like fireflies as the blacksmith works, and with every rhythmic strike you hear something ancient, the rule of measure. This section isn't about etiquette or faith. It's about the invisible laws that still govern your world today, the standardization of things. The smith looks up briefly, sweat gleaming, and nods. Every nail's the same weight, he mutters proudly, holding one up to the light. Lord's inspector will test 'em by noon. You raise an eyebrow. Inspectors, audits, quality control? Oh yes, before factories, before barcodes, there were royal standards, designed to keep greed and chaos at bay. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 13th century, medieval Europe had developed regulated systems for weights and measures, often enforced by royal decree. The English yard, the stone, the gallon, all formalized under kings like Henry III, who declared that one measure shall be used throughout the realm. The idea was revolutionary, consistency as justice. You could cross the country and trust that a pound of flour meant the same in York as in London. You might think of this every time your phone battery reads exactly 20%. That obsession with precision was born here, in soot and sweat. But it wasn't only about fairness, it was control. The crown's approval stamped onto every scale, every barrel, every merchant's conscience. You might say bureaucracy learned to hold a hammer first. The blacksmith gestures toward a merchant, arriving with a set of scales. They test his iron nails, weighing handful after handful. The difference between legal and illegal weight is barely the width of a fingernail, too light, and the fine could bankrupt him. The guild don't joke, the merchant mutters. And there it is, the guild, the medieval ancestor of every trade association, union and professional board you know. They wrote their own rules, guarded secrets, punished cheats, and decided who could work. It's easy to forget how medieval that resume requirement certified specialist really is. Inside the forge, you notice a wooden board etched with measurements. Rough lines and numbers burned into the grain. That's the guild's code. Keep your iron true, it reads. You smile. Even now, industries still chase that same purity. ISO standards, FDA labels, app certifications, all descendants of this board. The illusion of trust is built on shared math. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some towns, ale quality was tested by literally sitting in it. Inspectors, usually young apprentices, would pour beer onto a wooden bench, sit for half an hour, then stand up. If their leather breeches stuck, the brew had enough sugar content to pass. If not, the brewer faced punishment for watering it down. The origins of sticky situations, perhaps. You leave the forge and head toward the marketplace, where rows of stalls burst with goods, fish, cloth, spices, soap. Each stall has a set of official weights stamped with a small emblem, usually a crown or cross. Merchants handle them with reverence, like holy relics. A woman selling bread measures her loaves with a standard wooden mold, another weighs salt in tiny iron cups. If we cheat, she says softly, we cheat the Lord. For her, arithmetic and morality are the same language. Historians still argue whether this obsession with standardization was a sign of progress or paranoia. Some see it as the dawn of equality, every buyer protected from fraud. Others call it a creeping centralization of power. The beginning of bureaucracy choking local life. You sense both truths walking side by side. Order is always double-edged, comforting and suffocating in the same breath. You stop by a tailor's shop next. The tailor measures cloth using a rod exactly the length of his arm. This is a yard, he explains, by royal law, but his smile hints that he cheats by half a thumb when selling to outsiders. Even perfection has loopholes. That blend of obedience and rebellion feels timeless, doesn't it? Every accountant rounding decimals, every coder writing temporary fix, they're all whispering the same medieval prayer. Close enough. At the center of the market, you find the town's most important relic, the standard bushel, a bronze bowl chained to a post. Anyone can test their grain here. Farmers line up, muttering about fairness. You run your hand along its rim. It's cold, precise, almost reverent. This is civilization in a nutshell, literally. The belief that fairness can be forged in metal. Then there's money, the slipperiest measurement of all. You pass a coin changer's booth, where he weighs silver pennies with delicate scales. Half-clipped, he mutters, tossing one aside. People used to shave silver from coin edges to hoard the scrap, reducing its value while keeping its shape. The punishment? Losing your own edges, literally. You rub your fingers along your coin purse, suddenly aware that the trust you place in money is centuries deep and barely rational. A monk nearby preaches about greed, his voice rising above the clamor. Measure honestly, trade fairly, or your soul will be weighed and found wanting. You almost expect him to pull out scales of judgment. He doesn't need to. The metaphor already lives in everyone's mind. The medieval world saw cosmic justice as a ledger. Every lie had weight. Every truth had measure. The sun shifts, glinting off copper pots and glass beads. The market buzzes like a beehive. You think of the modern world, of barcodes, QR scanners, data metrics. We've turned measurement into religion, precision into poetry. You can't manage what you can't measure, managers say, unaware they're quoting the spirit of medieval auditors in Latin. You find a baker testing her oven's heat by tossing a pinch of flour onto the stone floor. It browns instantly and she nods, satisfied. Hot enough, she says. My mother taught me that trick. You smile at the simplicity. No thermometer, no chart, just instinct passed through generations. Maybe standardization isn't about numbers at all. It's about shared trust in what feels right. A child runs by holding a wooden stick marked with carved notches. It's my tally, he shouts proudly. You recognize it, the medieval credit system, the original IOU. Instead of coins, debts were recorded by cutting a stick down the middle, one half for the lender, one for the borrower. When they met again, the two halves had to match perfectly. It's primitive blockchain, if you squint hard enough. As the day cools, the blacksmith passes through again, whistling. Inspection passed, he says. The guild's seal stays on my door. His grin is quiet, tired, proud. You realize that for him, these standards aren't oppression. They're dignity. Proof that his work counts, that his craft belongs to something bigger than his forge. You leave the market as the light fades, walking past a row of measuring posts etched into the town gate. The tallest marks floods, the lowest marks droughts. Even nature gets measured, tamed, labeled for memory. You touch the stone. It's smooth from centuries of fingers doing the same. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls to close the market. Merchants pack their scales, farmers shoulder their sacks, and a sense of calm settles over the square. Fair trade done, balance restored. You take one last look at the bushel bowl gleaming in the twilight. It's almost sacred now, this idea that fairness can be made tangible, that justice can be weighed, and maybe that's why we still trust rules and rulers, contracts and codes, even when they fail us. We want to believe that somewhere, hidden beneath all the noise, the world is measurable, that if we keep our weights true, the universe will balance back. You walk on into the dusk, your footsteps rhythmic, even, precise, each one an echo of that ancient promise: measure, match, repeat. The morning air smells faintly of rain and wood smoke as you step back into the waking world. The path before you runs uphill toward a town square bustling with color, splashy reds, deep blues, a shimmer of gold thread catching the light. It looks like a festival, but it's really just market day again. The people are dressed not for fun but for rank. You're about to wander into the medieval universe of sumptuary laws, the original fashion police, and realize that every dress code email you've ever received is just a hand-me-down from the Middle Ages. You pause beside a young apprentice, tugging nervously at his tunic. "Too fine?" he whispers. "The warden's strict this week." His master eyes him up and down, muttering something about stripes being for tradesmen, not scholars. Even colour is politics here. Here's your mainstream historical fact. From the 13th century onward, European monarchs and city councils passed hundreds of laws controlling what people could wear. These sumptuary laws were meant to preserve class order, to make sure no commoner looked like a noble, and no merchant outshone his lord. In England, the 1363 Act of Apparel stated in excruciating detail who could wear what. Servants were banned from silk. Yeomen could wear wool trimmed with sheep fur. Knights were allowed velvet and satin. Nobles alone could wear gold embroidery or ermine fur. You wonder, maybe a little smugly, whether HR dress codes are that different. Business casual sounds suspiciously like human chic. A woman passes by in a gown lined with squirrel fur. Not the glamorous kind, just local grey practical. Still, she walks with pride. Winter fur, she says when she catches your glance. Legal, thank God. My sister married into a merchant family. She can't even wear this much. You nod, thinking about how fashion has always been surveillance disguised as beauty. You turn a corner and find a tailor's stall. Bolts of cloth spill out like a rainbow gone, slightly feral. The tailor waves you over, proudly showing a new Italian silk. Don't ask how it arrived, he says with a wink. Smuggled goods, it turns out, were the medieval version of designer knockoffs. There's a rule for everything, and a loophole for everyone. Historians still argue whether these laws were actually enforced or mostly symbolic. Some records show fines collected for illegal fabrics, others suggest people ignored them entirely. Many towns passed the same rules year after year, implying that fashion rebellion was practically a pastime. What's certain is that appearance meant allegiance. To dress above your station was not vanity. It was treason by wardrobe. Here's your quirky tidbit in Florence. Men once risked prison for wearing shoes that were too pointy, called palanes. These fashionable dagger-like shoes were seen as immoral and unholy, especially when they made kneeling in church impossible. The longer the toe, the prouder and more sinful the wearer. You imagine medieval influencers showing off their palanes on TikTok. For blessed, faith forbidden footwear. The deeper you wander into the square, the louder the debate becomes. One stall sells ribbons for all ranks. Another sells lace for those permitted. People whisper, compare, side-eye. Status is a performance, and the audience never stops judging. You brush past a young nobleman dressed in bright crimson, his doublet stitched with silver thread. He smells faintly of rosewater and entitlement. Can't have the cobblers dressing like dukes, he says, half to himself. Else who'd respect us? You're tempted to tell him about ripped jeans costing a 200, but he probably wouldn't get the joke. A priest nearby preaches moderation. Pride goeth before destruction, he warns, pointing his staff toward a group of laughing youths in imported velvet. You suspect his real problem is jealousy. The embroidery on his own robe gleams a little too well for humility. The irony, like his stitching, is immaculate. You stop by a mirror merchant's booth. Polished bronze plates reflect warped versions of every passerby. Some noble, some not. It's strange to see yourself among them, dressed in your plain travel clothes. But you realize something, even your hoodie, your sneakers, your casual look carries invisible class signals. We may have ditched the feathers and gold thread, but fashion still enforces unspoken hierarchies. The tailor returns, offering a dark blue cloak. You could pass for a minor clerk, he says, tying it loosely. You grin. Perfect camouflage. The thought makes you oddly giddy. Maybe that's the appeal. Fashion as rebellion, as disguise, as freedom in fabric. You remember teenage you, sneaking eyeliner or ripped sleeves past parental decree. The medieval spirit lives. Down the street, 2 town guards stop a man wearing a hat trimmed in fox fur. beyond your station," one says flatly. The man protests that he's newly apprenticed to a goldsmith. "That counts as trade up," he argues. The guards aren't impressed. They confiscate the hat. You half expect them to log it as evidence of excessive ambition. Historians still argue whether these laws were about morality or economics. Some claim rulers feared luxury would drain wealth from the land. Sumptuary laws as medieval versions of buy local. Others see pure class anxiety, the rich guarding their sparkle. Either way, fashion became a battlefield of identity, same as today's wars over fast fashion and quiet luxury. You wander into a nearby tavern, where talk turns to a recent edict banning excessive slashing in garments. How's one to breathe if not through his sleeves? Jokes a tailor, earning a round of laughter. The barkeep, wiping a mug, adds, "Ain't fashion unless someone's angry about it." It's the same energy as modern comment sections under celebrity outfits, just with more "I'll" and less "Wi-Fi." Night falls, and the marketplace glows in torchlight. Musicians play, couples dance, the colors blur together until class seems momentarily forgotten. A young servant girl twirls in a borrowed silk shawl, radiant and unafraid. For a heartbeat, she's royalty. The crowd watches, half scandalized, half enchanted. You realize rules crumble fastest under joy. As you walk away, you think of modern fashion, the invisible lines between acceptable and too much. Office wear, uniforms, dress codes. They're all descendants of this fabric feudalism. You can trace it straight from velvet bands to professional attire required. The joke, of course, is that we still police ourselves. We're the wardens now, whispering to our mirrors, "Is this too bold? Too plain? Too much for someone like me?" The rain finally begins, soft as silk, darkening the cobblestones. The tailor closes his stall, humming a tune about fortune's wheel and changing seasons. You glance once more at the square, where colors fade to gray under the drizzle. And yet, even in the dim light, people still straighten their clothes before heading home. Because even when the reason's forgotten, the rule remains you are what you wear, or at least, what the world decides you can afford to be. The rain drizzles into morning, the sky a pale grey quilt stretched over quiet rooftops. You follow the smell of damp earth and baked bread down a narrow lane lined with crooked beams and hanging charms. Little talismans, braided straw crosses, carved wooden saints, tiny bells, dangle from doorways. They sway in the breeze like wind chimes of collective superstition. You smile, realizing this town might be centuries old, but it's unmistakably familiar. The world has changed, but our fear of bad luck hasn't aged a day. A woman in a wool cloak nods at you as she sprinkles salt across her doorstep. "Keeps the devil out," she says matter-of-factly, then adds, "and cats." You chuckle softly, thinking of your own modern rituals. Knocking on wood before a meeting, deleting an email draft 3 times before sending, carrying that one lucky pen into exams. Congratulations, you're medieval, just with better lighting. You wander toward the church square, where stalls display all sorts of charms for sale, rings engraved with Latin prayers, bones of holy men. At least that's the pitch. Small glass vials filled with miracle dust. The crowd swirls around them eagerly. Protection is business, and business is good. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Middle Ages, relic worship was one of Europe's biggest spiritual industries. Churches claimed to possess everything from Christ's blood to St. Peter's toenails. Pilgrims traveled miles, paid coins, knelt in awe, and believed. These relics were seen as tangible links between heaven and earth, proof that holiness could be touched, traded, and carried home. Some cities grew rich on reputation alone. Canterbury had Thomas Becket's bones, Cologne had the Magi's skulls. Faith had a price tag, stamped and sealed by God's middleman. A friar at one stall gestures toward a glass reliquary shaped like a miniature arm. Saint Margaret's finger. He says solemnly. You peer inside. It's clearly a chicken bone, polished smooth. Still, people drop coins in the bowl, whispering prayers for luck, health, success. You wonder how different this really is from someone rubbing a lucky rabbit's foot before a job interview or keeping a crystal on their desk for good energy. The impulse is the same. Control the uncontrollable. Historians still argue whether most medieval people truly believed in these charms or treated them like insurance policies. Just in case. Letters and diaries suggest both. Some prayed with unshakable devotion, others rolled their eyes but paid anyway. As one 14th century merchant wrote, "Better to waste a penny than a soul." You think about modern lotteries, health supplements, productivity apps, each promising a kind of salvation, spiritual or otherwise. We've just rebranded our relics. Here's your quirky tidbit. 1/15th century recipe for warding off evil spirits involved sewing a live toad into a silk pouch and wearing it around your neck until it died. At which point, apparently, the curse had passed. That's not so different from carrying an old lucky charm long after it's lost its luster. Humans are sentimental sorcerers. We can't help it. You duck into a workshop where a craftsman carves tiny wooden saints. These go fast before exams, he says proudly. Especially Saint Joseph for apprentices. He shrugs. Half the boys believe. The other half just don't want to be the one who didn't believe. You nod. That logic could fuel half of corporate superstition today. The lucky coffee mug. The important meeting. Tie. The playlist that always works. A soft bell rings from the church tower, and you follow its echo inside. The air smells of wax and dust. Candles flicker around the altar, each one a whispered wish. You light one too. Why not? And as the flame steadies, you think of how the human mind craves ritual, structure, and symbols that tame the chaos of chance. Medieval folk had saints, we have systems. The packaging changes, but the faith remains. In a side chapel, a young monk polishes a reliquary. He glances at you and says quietly, "People come for miracles. I think they stay for comfort." His words linger like incense. Comfort. That's the true relic, passed from age to age, disguised as faith, habit, or superstition. Outside again, the street is livelier. A black cat darts between legs. 3 people spit over their shoulders. Someone tosses salt behind it. Another murmurs a charm. You smile, chaos theory in medieval form. The same instinct makes you refresh your inbox 3 times before a big news email, hoping to bend fate's arm. A merchant at a corner stall calls out, "Amulets for traders? Keeps your scales honest and your rivals clumsy." You watch him tie a small pouch of herbs and bone with a red thread. "Guaranteed luck," he says. Guaranteed. Of course, means nothing, but the buyer beams as if holding destiny in twine. Historians still debate whether these practices represented true religion or social theatre. A way to belong, to share collective hope. Maybe that's why we still hang dream catchers, wear oval eye bracelets, or keep office plants. For vibes. Deep down, everyone needs a little theatre of reassurance. The sun breaks briefly through clouds, catching a woman polishing a brass horseshoe above her door. "All charm," she says. "Keeps me safe." You ask if she believes in it. She smiles. "Doesn't matter. It reminds me to be careful." That feels profound somehow. The transformation of superstition into mindfulness. You stroll toward a guildhall where merchants prepare for a new trading week. Inside, you spot a table lined with charms, carved lions, saint medals, painted icons. One man touches his charm before signing a deal. Another sets a tiny cross beside his ledger. And there it is. The medieval spirit thriving in the fluorescent heart of capitalism. Ritual before risk. The conversation around you hums like low prayer. Someone jokes that Saint Christopher, should be made patron of accountants. Another laughs, holding up a coin stamped with a king's face.
This is my real saint.
The laughter's easy but nervous, mockery as armor. As evening falls, townsfolk begin closing their shutters, murmuring evening blessings. Some tuck charms under pillows, others hang sprigs of rosemary above beds. The air fills with soft faith, half sincere, half habitual. You catch yourself whispering, "Good night," to the relic stall as you pass. Back at your inn, the hearth glows warm. On the mantels sits a small charm of Saint Blaise, its paint chipped and eyes almost kind. The innkeeper notices your gaze. "That one's been there since my great-grandfather," she says. Keeps the fires steady. You grin. "Does it work?" She shrugs. "Never had a chimney fire." You both laugh, but neither of you moves it. As the fire crackles, you think about the modern office desk, how people decorate them with the same quiet hope. A pebble from a vacation, a photo of family, a novelty mug. Each one says, "I believe in something that keeps me steady." Maybe superstition isn't about ignorance at all. Maybe it's how the human heart stays balanced between fear and hope. The medieval world simply named its luck aloud, while we disguise ours in aesthetics. Outside, the last bells of Compline toll, soft and distant. You close your eyes, feeling their rhythm echo through the centuries. Whether it's saints or symbols, charms or calendars, we still seek order in a disorderly world. You can almost hear the monks whisper again. People come for miracles, but they stay for comfort. The next morning dawns hazy, a pale fog hanging low over the fields. You follow the steady clop of hooves toward the manor at the edge of town, where banners stir lazily in the wind. The crest on them, gold lion, red field, glimmers in the grey light, and the gatehouse guards salute half-heartedly as you pass. Behind the stone walls, the feudal order hums quietly to life. Here, loyalty isn't just sentiment, it's the rulebook of survival. And as you watch a steward bark orders at servants, you realize the corporate ladder didn't invent itself. It just changed uniforms. A rooster crows, the yard stirs, stable boys rush to feed horses, kitchen maids haul baskets, and the steward, clipboard of his day, parchment rolled tight, checks names off a list. You can almost hear him say, "Performance reviews are due by Michaelmas." In a way, he's middle management for the medieval age. Here's your mainstream, historical fact: feudalism, the backbone of medieval Europe, rested on a hierarchy of loyalty. Kings granted land to nobles, nobles granted pieces to knights, knights to peasants, and in return, each owed service to the level above. Land was currency, loyalty was the contract. A knight swore fealty to his lord, promising military aid and obedience. A peasant swore homage, working the soil that wasn't his. The system looked rigid, but it thrived on nuance. Every promise was negotiable. Every title could rise or fall. If that sounds like modern corporate, tiers, or chains of command, congratulations, you've just traced your org chart back to the 12th century. You're ushered into the Great Hall, a vast room smelling of smoke, tallow, and damp wool. At the high table sits the Lord himself, dressed in heavy velvet, rings glinting on his fingers. He nods curtly as his steward whispers updates. The harvest light, but loyal hands remain, the steward says. The Lord grunts approval. Loyalty matters more than yield. Around him stand retainers, scribes, and a few hopeful petitioners clutching scrolls. One bows so low you worry for his spine. You watch the ceremony of status unfold. The Lord extends his hand. The petitioner kisses it, swears allegiance, receives permission to lease a few acres. It's bureaucratic, but it's also emotional. Power, here is performance. Then the steward turns to you. "You're the traveler," he says. "Care to observe our pledging day?" You nod, of course. You're here for the history, but also for the patterns it still prints across time. One by one, the tenants step forward, reciting vows of service. I am your man, they say. That phrase, so simple, so binding, will echo for centuries in our language. You still hear its descendants. I've got your back. I'm on your team. I work for you. Each one carries a shadow of feudalism's weight. Here's your quirky tidbit. In medieval England, vassals sometimes sealed their oath not by signing paper, but by a symbolic gesture, placing their hands inside the lord's and saying, I become your man. That act was so intimate it unsettled some clergy who saw it as a rival to marriage vows. So yes, your workplace, team building, handshake has medieval roots, minus the candles and incense. Historians still argue whether feudalism was oppressive or symbiotic. Some say it crushed freedom beneath hierarchy, others claim it created stability, binding society together through duty and protection. The truth, as always, lives between extremes. For many, the lord was both tyrant and lifeline, the one who took taxes, but also defended the village from bandits. You think of modern corporations and can't help smiling wryly. We're a family, the CEO says, while revising the payroll. Some things never change. Lunch arrives, bread, broth, and a roasted bird that might once have been ambitious. Servants move silently, trained in invisible choreography. The lord eats first, then his guests, then the staff in descending order of importance. Even hunger obeys rank. You remember the open office kitchen back home, the unspoken rule that interns wait until the boss has served themselves coffee. Feudal ghosts sip lattes, too. After the meal, you wander outside to the training yard. Knights in training spar with wooden swords, the sound of clashing echoing off the walls. Their master shouts corrections.
Discipline, duty, never falter before your lord.
You could drop him into a modern leadership seminar, and he'd fit right in. Replace Lord, client, and shield with spreadsheet, and nothing changes. One young squire, sweaty and grinning, wipes his brow. My reward's a place at table, he says proudly. And if I serve well, maybe a horse of my own. You nod, amused. Promotions, perks, performance incentives, they're as old as ambition. In the stables, an older servant brushes a horse's mane. You serve the man. You serve his beast, he mutters. Don't matter who you swear to, someone's always above. His tone isn't bitter, just resigned. Centuries later, that same quiet pragmatism lives in every worker muttering, it's just a job. As afternoon fades, the lord rides out to inspect the fields. You join the retinue, horses kicking up mud. The peasants bow as he passes, some out of respect, some out of necessity. He nods curtly, says little. The power dynamic is wordless but unmistakable. He owns their time, their labor, their fear. You realize that hierarchy isn't always enforced by chains. It's often built from shared understanding of where you stand. Historians still argue about what feudalism felt like to live under. Was it suffocating duty or cozy stability? Some say the oaths bound people together in ways we've lost. That loyalty gave meaning, a sense of belonging modern life can't replicate. Others call that nostalgia for servitude. Either way, you sense the human need to belong to something bigger than oneself, even if it means surrendering a little freedom. Back in the hall, evening settles. The lord sits before the fire, dictating letters to his scribe. To my faithful vassal, he begins, I grant leave to manage the northern pasture. His voice is calm, deliberate, confident in its authority. You wonder how many managers have unconsciously borrowed that tone. Per my last email, after all, carries a hint of feudal menace. The steward lights candles, sealing the day with ritual. Service rendered, honor kept. He says softly. Everyone bows their heads. You find yourself doing the same. It's hard not to be swept up in the rhythm of order. Then you catch yourself, straighten, and chuckle. The instinct to obey runs deeper than we admit. The hall grows quiet, save for the crackle of the fire. On the walls hang shields painted with family crests, each one a rare some carved in color. You can read their history like a LinkedIn page. Who served whom, who rose, who fell. The difference is that here, reputations last centuries instead of news cycles. A bard in the corner strums a lute, singing of a knight betrayed by his liege. Loyalty, he croons, is the coin that never keeps its shine. You close your eyes, hearing echoes of modern burnout, disillusionment, the quiet rebellion of workers quitting in silence. The melody bridges centuries effortlessly. Outside, the fog thickens again. The manor lights glow faintly through it, distant and golden. You think of how loyalty still defines success. Employees evaluated by engagement. Citizens praised for service. Soldiers sworn to flag and country. The structures change, the expectation doesn't. We're all still vassals of something. Rain falls in lazy, silver threads, tracing dark lines down the manor's stone walls as you step toward the village below. The air smells of wet straw and smoke, and somewhere in the distance a bell tolls. Slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. You follow the sound to a small church, standing slightly crooked on its hill. Its doors are open, the candlelight inside flickering like gold coins in the dusk. The scent of incense and damp wood greets you, wrapping the space in something almost holy, but also faintly anxious. Tonight, you're not here for confession, you're here to follow the money. Because if feudal loyalty was the spine of medieval society, the church was its circulatory system, the bloodstream of wealth, guilt, and good intentions. And every drop, in one way or another, led to tithers. Here's your mainstream historical fact: in most of medieval Europe, everyone owed 1/10 of their annual produce or income to the church. This tithe wasn't optional. If you grew wheat, 1/10 went to the priest. If you brewed ale, 1/10 of your barrels filled the church cellar. If you raised sheep, 1 in 10 lambs was marked for God. It was both tax and ritual, half spiritual duty, half financial trapdoor. Refuse to pay, and you risked not just legal trouble but moral exile. You watch a farmer drag a cart of barley up the muddy hill, muttering about how the best sacks always seem to go to heaven. A cleric meets him at the steps, ledger in hand, quill poised like a dagger. 10 for thee, 1 for God, the man says, counting with a professional smile. It's bureaucratic theatre, divine math performed with mortal precision. You lean against the wall and can't help but smirk. Replace the cassock with a blazer, the ledger with a laptop, and you've got the tax office, or maybe your company's HR department. Systems of virtue and payment still cling together. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some peasants got creative with their tithers. Records tell of farmers offering one very fat pig instead of multiple scrawny ones. Technically still 1/10, but with a wink. Others brewed holy ale for the priest's consumption, which suspiciously resembled payment in liquid cheer. A few clever souls even tried to tie the bad seed grain, arguing that it was still grain. The priest didn't always agree, and sometimes, just sometimes, the priest was drunk enough not to notice. Historians still argue whether the church's wealth was the glue or the poison of medieval life. Some see it as a stabilizing force, building hospitals, schools, and cathedrals that outlived kingdoms. Others see a vast machine of guilt-driven economics, a divine subscription service where missing a payment meant eternal consequences. The truth is probably both. The church fed the poor and taxed them, comforted sinners and sold indulgences to ease those sins faster. Inside, the priest finishes evening prayers. His voice echoes through the vaulted space, Latin phrases folding into the candlelight. You catch the words, pro animibus benefactorum nostrum, for the souls of our benefactors. Translation: thanks for your donations. After service, villagers linger in the nave. A woman kneels, leaving a handful of coins near the altar. For my husband's health, she whispers. The priest nods solemnly. You realize that the medieval tithe wasn't just payment. It was participation. People gave because giving felt like control over fate. Donate enough, and maybe God notices your roof doesn't leak next storm. Centuries later, the pattern remains, only the names change. Taxes for infrastructure, donations for healthcare, carbon offsets for sins of consumption. Humanity still wants to buy redemption, just with better branding. You step back outside into the rain. Across the square, a bailiff collects the king's taxes. His tone is firmer, his sympathy smaller. His Majesty's due, he says to a baker who winces as he hands over coins. You notice something fascinating: the church and the crown compete, yet cooperate. It's a duet of control. One plays moral melody, the other beats fiscal rhythm. The baker sighs. Between God and the king, I'll have naught left for me. You smile gently. At least heaven takes installments, you say. He laughs, though not deeply. That night, you stay at a small inn, where the innkeeper's wife tells you about the Peter's pence, an extra penny tax collected annually for Rome. They say it keeps us blessed, she mutters, scrubbing mugs. But I've yet to see a saint buy bread. You sip your ale, thinking how taxes often wear the costume of righteousness. Here's where the story turns philosophical. The medieval church didn't just collect wealth. It curated morality around it. Greed was sin, but giving was holy. Poverty could be virtue, if you were poor politely. This moral economy still lingers in our psyche. We tip, donate, subscribe to good causes, and post about it online for spiritual brownie points. The impulse is the same: public virtue through measurable giving. Historians still argue whether the Reformation truly broke that pattern. Protestant reformers railed against indulgences and the sale of salvation, yet soon invented their own ethics of earning grace through work. The tithe turned into taxes. The priest became the bureaucrat. Whether kneeling at an altar or filing returns, by April 15, you're still confessing to a system that promises order in exchange for obedience. You imagine yourself walking through a marketplace at dusk. Merchants close their stalls, counting coins under tarps. A friar passes, shaking a wooden box labeled for the poor. You see people drop coins in with the same expression you've seen at checkout counters beside. Donate one to help the cause. Half guilt, half relief. Humans crave moral clarity as much as physical comfort. The next morning, sunlight breaks through cloud. You follow the road out of town to where fields open wide and quiet. Farmers bend to their tasks, a slow ballet of endurance. You stop to talk to one, a leathery man who smiles through his missing teeth. The church takes, the Lord takes, the king takes, he says, but we still plant. His words carry no anger, just realism. He offers you a crust of bread. It tastes of earth and salt. You think about how generosity and obligation are twins. Born together, impossible to separate. Back in town, you find the priest again. He's counting coins in a back room, humming softly. Does it ever end? You ask. He glances up. Never, he says. The tithe keeps the world turning. Without it, the bells would stop. His words hang heavy, half threat, half truth. Later that evening, you sit near the church door as villagers trickle by, dropping their offerings into a chest. The coins clink softly, rhythmic as rain. You wonder if people found comfort in that sound. The steady proof that they were doing their part, that they belonged to something greater than their hunger. As the sky deepens into violet, you think of modern parallels again: payroll deductions, service fees, charitable donations. We pay, not just to live, but to belong. The medieval tithe was more than tax. It was a subscription to salvation. Your gym membership, streaming plan, and automatic donation drafts are its digital descendants. One last image lingers before you move on. A peasant woman lighting a candle before a saint's statue. Her face glows in the flame's reflection, eyes closed, lips whispering a prayer for a good harvest. The candle costs her a loaf of bread, but she doesn't mind. The act itself is worth the price. You realize she's not so different from anyone today dropping a few dollars into a GoFundMe or an offering plate, hoping that somewhere, someone's keeping cosmic score. The rain begins again, soft and steady. You pull your cloak tighter, listening to the water run off the church roof. The drip like coins into a distant collection box. The medieval world turns beneath your feet, rich and poor alike, caught in its divine economy. And as you walk away down the road toward the next faint village light, you can't help thinking, maybe the only thing stronger than faith is the habit of paying for it. The wind smells strange tonight, like damp earth and the faint sweetness of decay. You follow a narrow path through the outskirts of a once bustling town, the air thick with the memory of something that happened long ago but refuses to leave. The silence feels wrong. No laughter from the tavern, no hammering from the forge, just the occasional bark of a dog and the whisper of your boots against cobblestone. You're walking straight into one of the darkest legacies of the medieval world, the Black Death. It's not bedtime story material, you think. But then again, the rules born from plague never really left us. You're still living with them. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death wiped out an estimated third of Europe's population. Entire villages vanished, trade collapsed, and faith wavered. Cities turned into graveyards. But in the chaos came a strange sort of innovation, what we'd now call public health. Quarantine, sanitation, even the concept of social distance. They all started here in desperation. You stop near a small wooden house, half collapsed. Someone once painted a red cross on the door, now faded to pink. That symbol marked homes under isolation. God have mercy upon us, it would read beneath. The rule was simple: no one enters, no one leaves. Bread was delivered at a distance, water left at the edge of the street. A grim efficiency we'd later repeat in our own ways. Plastic barriers, 6 feet of space, contactless everything. A cart creaks past, pulled by an old grey horse. The driver calls softly, "Bring out your dead." The phrase has become almost comedic in pop culture, but here, it feels like ritual. You can see why it stuck. Fear made people invent structure. Routine was a shield. When the world went mad, rules became sanity. You pass the old city gate, wooden beams nailed shut long ago. A sign still hangs there, warning travelers to present a clean bill of health. In Venice, that document became the Fidei Sanit, the first form of health passport. Ships arriving from infected ports were forced to wait 40 days before unloading. 40 giorni. That's where the word quarantine was born. And you thought your flight delays were bad. Here's your quirky tidbit. Early quarantine officers often wore special outfits to mark their authority. Long coats soaked in wax, wide, brimmed hats, and sticks to maintain distance from the sick. Later, these evolved into the eerie plague doctor costume. Beaked masks stuffed with herbs to filter disease. Historians still argue whether the outfit worked or just terrified people into compliance. Either way, the aesthetic lives on. Every Halloween proves it. You walk farther into the town square, now overgrown with weeds. A fountain gurgles faintly, its basin filled with rainwater. Birds flit between the rooftops. You imagine the square as it was, markets bustling, gossip humming, life pulsing, and then the silence that followed. The plague didn't just kill people, it rewired behavior. People stopped shaking hands, avoided strangers, burned the clothes of the dead. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether the plague accelerated social progress or halted it. Some say it dismantled feudal hierarchies by killing off laborers, forcing lords to pay better wages. Others say it birthed new paranoia, new witch hunts, and deeper divides. You can sense both truths lingering here, like twin shadows. At the edge of town stands a small chapel. Inside candles flicker before statues of saints said to protect against illness. Sebastian, Roch, and the Virgin Mary. Pilgrims once knelt here, whispering prayers for mercy. You step inside, the air cold and heavy. Scratched into the wall are words in Latin. Post pestum pax. After plague, peace. But you know the peace was never complete. Outside, a group of children in ragged tunics play a circle game, singing a song that gives you chills. Ring around the rosy, you whisper. The rhyme's true origin is debated, but you can't help feeling its rhythm matches the times. Flowers against the smell of death, pockets of posies to ward off disease. It's how people processed fear, they sang it into lullabies. The idea of containment didn't vanish after the Black Death. It mutated, just like the germs themselves. By the 1600s, cities like London and Milan had formal health boards. They collected data on deaths, issued public orders, and tracked infections. The early modern census, born from panic, the world learned to count its dead, and in doing so, began to manage the living. You stop near a bridge where the water runs black beneath. A tattered sign reads, "No passage without inspection." It's centuries old, yet you recall the plexiglass barriers, the hand sanitizer stations, the blue arrows on supermarket floors. We like to think progress is linear, but it's often circular. Rules rediscovered, renamed, and redeployed. A merchant once said that plague years were bad for business, but good for bookkeeping. With fewer hands to till the fields, wages rose. Guilds opened to newcomers. Women stepped into roles left vacant by men. The system cracked, and through those cracks, modernity leaked in. It's strange how catastrophe can fertilize change. You find yourself near a row of plague pits, now marked by simple stones. Grass grows thick over them, indifferent. You pause, realizing this landscape shaped not just medicine, but psychology. The constant proximity of death forced people to confront mortality daily. Some turned deeply religious, others wildly hedonistic. You recognize the same split today. People baking sourdough to find control, others chasing distraction through glowing screens. Different tools, same species. Historians still argue whether the church's grip weakened. Because of the plague, so many priests died administering last rites that congregations lost faith in divine protection. It opened the door to skepticism, science, even rebellion. You can almost hear the whisper of reason being born out of desperation. As twilight deepens, you walk along what remains of the city wall. A tattered notice still clings to the gate. Clean houses shall mark their doors with white. You imagine the medieval inspectors checking compliance. Like public health officers centuries later, bureaucracy, it turns out, is humanity's favorite response to panic. You pause at an inn rebuilt over the bones of the old one. The innkeeper's daughter tells you stories her grandmother swears are true. That some families barricaded themselves inside for months, surviving on dried beans and hope. They say the rats learn to knock, she whispers with a grin. You laugh, because it's easier than thinking about the truth. Fear always breeds folklore. There's comfort in rules. The plague proved that. People washed their hands, not because they understood bacteria, but because someone told them it worked. Fear didn't make them scientists. It made them believers in process. You recall how quickly we built our own rituals when faced with invisible threat masks. Wipes, flatten the curve. We've been practicing that dance since the 14th century. As the stars bloom above, you realize something deeper. The Black Death didn't just shape medicine, it reshaped trust. It taught humanity that safety could be mandated, that behavior could be standardized for the common good. Whether that's progress or loss is still up for debate. You pass the cemetery one last time. Fireflies hover above the stones, tiny floating lanterns. Some wear an owl calls. The night feels strangely peaceful now, as if the land itself has exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. And yet, the rules remain. Quarantine, cleanliness, distance. The idea that invisible threats demand visible obedience. You're living inside that inheritance, each sneeze or cough still carrying echoes of 1348. You reach the edge of town, where the road turns toward the open countryside. Behind you, the ghost city sleeps, its lessons embedded in every modern law about health, hygiene, and human panic. Ahead, the stars shimmer. The air smells faintly of lavender and smoke. You take one last look back, whispering to no one in particular. We survived it once. And somehow, we still keep the rules. You leave the ghost of the plague town behind, walking toward higher ground where the horizon stretches like a pale tapestry of silver mist and rising dawn. The air is cooler here, sweet with the scent of pine and dew. Ahead, perched on a hill like a patient dragon, stands a castle, its towers cracked but proud, its windows winking faintly with reflected sunlight. You've seen countless versions of it, already in your journey: the manor, the church, the village wall. But this one feels like an ending. Or maybe, like the rulebook itself, it never really ends. As you approach, the wind picks up, carrying the faint metallic tang of old iron gates. You push them open, they groan, as if waking from centuries of obedience. Inside, the courtyard is overgrown, vines coiling around forgotten stone benches. A single flag flutters limply on the battlement, a faded crest whose meaning has dissolved into rumor. You imagine the lives that moved through this place: servants sweeping the great hall, knights clanking up spiral stairs, cooks muttering about supper portions. Every rule they followed, who sat where, who spoke when, who bowed first, was once a survival mechanism. And somehow, those invisible patterns trickle down to us like sediment in a river. Here's your mainstream historical fact: castles weren't just military fortresses. They were administrative hubs, microcosms of the medieval world's obsession with order. Every chamber had rank and ritual. The great hall for feasts and decrees, the chapel for confession, the solar for private rest. All arranged to reflect social hierarchy. You can still feel that architecture in modern spaces: boardrooms raised above work floors, podiums at the front of classrooms, even VIP lounges that whisper, "You may pass," or "You may wait." The floor plan of power never really changed. You step into the great hall. Dust motes drift through the beams of sunlight slicing down from the high windows. The echo of your footsteps feels ceremonial. On one wall, faded tapestries depict scenes of law and punishment: a judge in robes, peasants kneeling, banners of justice fluttering above. You smirk softly, because while the setting has changed, the symbolism hasn't. We still worship order, even when we pretend to rebel against it. A servant's ghost seems to glide past, bowing automatically. "My lord," he murmurs, voice faint as wind. You imagine him waking every day to bells, chores, and curfews. Freedom was never the point. Certainty was. Rules gave rhythm, and rhythm gave peace. You might hate your alarm clock, but deep down, you rely on it the same way he did. In a side chamber, you find what remains of the library. Shelves sag under the weight of time, their scrolls reduced to curls of parchment. You brush one open gently, revealing a medieval household manual, lists of duties, etiquette, prayers. "Rise with the first bell," it says. "Wash thy hands before meat. Speak not before thy betters." You chuckle. Half those commands sound like office training slides. The other half, like social media etiquette. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval households had official rules of silence. After certain hours, servants were forbidden to speak unless addressed directly. Monasteries kept stricter versions, gestural sign language for communication during quiet periods. Fast forward to today, and you find quiet hours in apartments, do not disturb, signs in hotels, and focus mode, notifications on phones. we're still craving the illusion of order in the chaos we create. Historians still argue whether humanity's love for rules comes from fear or hope. Did medieval people obey because they trusted authority, or because they feared losing their place in the chain? And when we follow modern rules, speed limits, taxes, etiquette, are we honoring collective wisdom or just afraid of chaos? You stare into the dusty light, realizing both answers might be true. You climb the narrow spiral stairs, your hand trailing along cold stone. From the parapet, the view stretches wide farmland, villages, thin lines of road like veins in a living body. The castle once watched over it all, a symbol of control, but also protection. You can almost hear the Lord's voice echoing through the wind. These are my people. Today, governments say the same thing, though with friendlier branding and better PR. You sit on the edge of the wall, legs dangling above the drop. The wind tugs at your cloak. Below, you see traces of everything you've walked through. The church bells, the manor house, the guild hall, the plague town. Each one birthed a rule we still carry, long after its purpose faded. You think of table manners from the dining hall, taxes from the church chest, loyalty from the Lord's oath. The medieval world didn't vanish. It standardized itself, hidden beneath screens, policies, and polite smiles. A hawk circles above you, riding the thermals. You envy its freedom for a moment, then realize even the hawk follows instinctive laws. Currents, timing, hunger. Maybe there's no such thing as life without rules, only the illusion of choice about which ones we follow. The sun dips lower. Shadows lengthen across the courtyard. You wander into the castle's private chapel, where cracked frescoes still show hollows and kneeling figures. Someone carved words into the altar centuries ago. Lex est lumen. Law is light. You trace the letters with your finger, wondering if the carver meant it as comfort or complaint. The line between those two has always been blurry. As evening gathers, the castle fills with the soft hush of crickets and settling stones. You imagine torches once flaring to life along these walls, guards making rounds, doors bolting for the night. Even rest had ritual. Lock the gate, bar the door, pray the dark stays outside. You smile softly. Your own bedtime routine isn't much different, just less armor and more we. Outside, mist curls around the moat, turning the air gauzy. You pause by a crumbling archway and think of everything you've seen on this long walk through medieval echoes. The rules that started as superstition, fear, or convenience now masquerade as logic. We follow them because they feel right, not because we remember why. You realize the past isn't behind you. It's the scaffolding beneath your every habit. You take one slow breath, listening to the world settling into night. The same way villagers once listened for the curfew bell. The same way city dwellers now wait for streetlights to hum on. Some rules fade, others simply dim and glow again under new lamps. And as the first stars appear above the castle towers, you can't help smiling at the absurd, tender truth of it all. Medieval humanity, terrified of chaos, built a maze of customs to feel safe. And we, despite our rockets, algorithms, and noise-cancelling headphones, are still wandering that same maze, whispering, "This is how it's done." The night deepens around you, slow and velvet. The castle walls blur into shadow, and the air cools against your skin. Every echo, every breath of wind feels like it's drawing a curtain across history's restless stage. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the centuries quiet themselves. The bells that once called peasants to prayer, the quills scratching decrees, the distant cry of a plague cart, all fade into one gentle hum, like the fan beside your bed. You take another breath. The rules we've inherited, when to eat, how to speak, whom to serve, are only stories that hardened into habits. They began as survival tactics, morphed into courtesies, and now rest like dust on our daily lives. Yet somehow within that dust, there's comfort, The shape of order gives meaning to the unknown. The heartbeat of ritual reminds you that you belong to a pattern older than memory. If you listen closely, you can almost hear a medieval lullaby drifting through the corridor, soft, repetitive, meant to calm frightened hearts. The same melody hums quietly beneath the buzz of modern life. So, as you lie back now, eyes half closed, body unwinding, let the walls of that ancient castle fade. Imagine the torches dimming, the servants whispering good night, the gates closing one last time. The world outside can wait till morning. For now, there's only the hush of history, the rhythm of your breathing, and the slow drift toward dreams.